Hello, my name is Vittoria de Francis, and I'm a curator, language researcher, and writer based between Berlin and London.
I'm Emily Nam. We are art people.
If you're aware of the fact that there is going to be like a certain degree of unknownness, then you have to be really present. You have to be really aware to because otherwise then things are not gonna go are just gonna be very random, so you have to be aware of like how this space is mutating, this like void space, and what is entering in it, and just be very perceptive.
On today's episode, I'm in conversation with Vittoria de Francis, a curator, voice artist and writer based between London and Berlin. Her practice incorporates language experimentation, voice performance, and collective projects that celebrate the possibilities of open source collaboration. Through her explorations with sonic compositions, conversations, readings, and writing, Vittoria has envisioned a total model for being and facilitating a connection with fantasy and space. Among her projects are Glossa, which is a widespread series of interdisciplinary happenings, a project that has travelled internationally from New York City and Europe, connecting communities and envisioning new models for sound and voice performance. A recent exploration, Unknown Language, echoes Hildegard von Bingen's Lingua Ignota, deployed as a 5-week residency at Refuge Worldwide, presenting different approaches to voice in sound and voice as sound. Her writings have been featured in Flash Art, Resident Advisor, Spike Art Magazine, Terraforma Journal, and with CIRCA, the Cultural Institute of Radical Contemporary Arts. Vittoria has generously shared a selection of tracks from her upcoming album release with recital program, Solo Voce. Please stay around at the end of this conversation to listen to these sound poetry works. Hi, Vittoria. Thank you for joining me today. It's
Hi,
really
Emily.
nice to have you.
Likewise.
I haven't seen you since you're in New York. Maybe 2000 and... was it last year?
It was I was realizing it was 2 years ago.
It's a long time.
It's crazy because these days I'm having a lot of like throwbacks from New York, and I was actually checking if there was a Meredith Monk workshop when I'm there, which is not happening unfortunately. But then as I was preparing for today, I realized that yes, we met in Meredith's apartments.
Yeah, which was fantastic. I just had such an incredible experience with those workshops. I've been back twice.
Oh wow!
Since I did one recently, but only a single day. But that was just very unique in her loft.
Totally. And it sparked so many nice connections also. I mean, sure. I think that's the like voice related also somehow, we went from voice space to voice space. So yeah, I'm really happy that we're having this conversation today, as actually that time was also, being in New York was also very important for me, in many ways. Like it gave me a lot of like mental space to think of projects that are now like in fully operation. So
I think it was a very unique time because we were coming out of this COVID sleepless state, and I think the city was wondering if the creative soup was going to become something. And when you were there, it was very potent. There was a lot of events. You started your collaborative space events, which I want to talk to you about. It was just a very interesting time. There was also the workshop. I can't think of their name. You really loved them.
Which workshop?
The young
boys dancing group.
Yeah.
Oh my god! You know that yesterday I was wearing my gelatin hoodie. And someone was like, "Oh my god, why do you have that hoodie?" And I was like, "Yes, because that moment at a Flaherty's with gelatin and the young boys dancing group, I I was like so touched by the power of that happening, and it kind of like made me understand also the power of a city as New York. Like I really felt an energy like it, which is rare, because you go to very amazing things, but it's not so often you get like touched and feel that people around you are collectively touched and captured in the same way. So that was amazing. I actually recently saw the Young Boys Dancing Group again in Berlin, and it was also great. But in that moment there was something, and I agree. I think that COVID, rather than like being a stasis, was also like we all needed to like chill down and think, which I feel that right now we would need COVID so much right now to like think about what's going on and like pause 1 second, because we have like this, we're overwhelmed by things, especially also a lot of very disturbing ones, that we literally don't have time, mental space to deal with them. It's like and some things are huge things that are happening around us. So I feel that actually that taught us the how much space and time are essential. And at least for me, it was a very positive moment. Like I think that if you had the luxury to still have a job, and be able to do it at home and have more time to think, because you wouldn't be going to all these like openings events, and you had a lot of time to be at home and think, and also imagine, because I think COVID kind of like did a reset on all possibilities, because suddenly like we wouldn't know what was going to happen, if it was going to be like that forever. So that like reintroduced a lot of like reworlding fantasy and thinking, oh, okay, so maybe when this ends it's going to be like this. Now there was a lot of talking about, will the world be as it was before, or wanting it to be as it was before. There was really like this thought on like before and after, which, I mean, nothing really changed eventually, but I think there was that potential.
Sure. And I think that creative potential and committing to something that was really important and shifting how we approach our work gave rise, for me personally, developing new projects, knowing how I wanted to think, reframing. And I agree. It's like just that quietness to step back into what we're doing and how we're making, how we're engaging. And just going back to all those performance events that were happening, it was very inclusive. We were part of something. We weren't just watching it. And I
Totally.
think that really shifted the energy of what was happening. It was
Totally.
vibrant. You've got a lot of projects going on. You hold together different spaces between music, art, and writing. But let's talk about your project, ggggllllooooosssaaaa, and how that came about, and what the stimulus or the seed was for that becoming, and about how it's changed you in your making.
Yes. So that project was born out of, I would say, synchronicity, like really things that have been fermenting since a long time within me, that then intercepted these energies that were in New York at the time I was there, and really random happenings that just led me to have a space, to be invited in a space where I could organize something, which was the year in. I actually had the spark, like I had this like intuition and also awe for the fact that in New York actually there is a sound poetry scene, that there is a community of like voice artists, sound poets, and that it's a thing, that it's a practice, which is something that I never I never experienced before, or like by living in Milano or Berlin. And I mean, my whole research is on voice and language, and I've been obsessively researching about, any kind of practice that has to do with voice, especially within like sound. And I remember I went to Artist Space like literally 1 week after I was I arrived. I went to Artist Space, and there was this festival, the Sound Poetry Festival organized by Recital. And I arrived there and I saw all these incredible performances, both by very established artists and like very emergent artists. And I exit that place like crying and thinking, wow, okay, so I need to, there is space to do that. So my first thought was like, I want to go back to Italy and I want to create something. I want to create a platform that allows artists working with voice to come together in, either like a digital platform and then like eventually like a physical space, because for me, like, that participatory element, the collective element is fundamental, I think, especially if you like work with language and voice. So, and then yeah, I mean, when I was in New York, I didn't had many friends, and I also decided to like just I was wandering a lot on my own and exploring. So I one day I had to go to this like SEM concert at Paula Cooper Gallery, and it was raining a lot, and I was just walking, and I thought, okay, I'm just gonna go to this ear in place that I heard about, because actually Recital was organizing a listening session, but everything was very obscure and like very like was not very communicated, so like online. So I entered the ear in and was like, where is this? And no one was really able to like tell me anything. And then they were like, why don't you sit and just drink something? And I was like, yeah, okay, I'll just do that. And then suddenly someone appears and is Rip, and he was like, I heard you're looking for the Recital listening session. I was like, yeah. He was like, come with me, like, and you're like, yeah, of course, I'm just gonna follow this stranger, so
He's
and
a
then
big guy.
yeah, I mean, Rip looks like a very nice person, so you kind of like intuitively would trust him. But and that's how so I ended up at the Ear Up, which is now the apartment above the Ear In, which is like a kernel and has been a kernel for like music experimentation since the 70s. And all the great artists who worked with voice, from Laurie Anderson, Meredith Monk to, Yoko Ono,
They've all been there.
they've all been there. Like literally, like some of them like slept there, stayed there. There was this Ear magazine, and with incredible interviews, archival interviews from the 70s, with all. So for me, it was like this. Yeah, it was incredible to be able to access that space. And then eventually, I needed a place to sleep, and so over the weekends, and Rip told me, yes, you can sleep here because we've always been hosting artists, but then you have to organize something, because we stopped doing salons during COVID. So I would like you to curate some salons. And I was like, that's like the dream proposal. So, this, it kind of yeah, synchronicity. So suddenly I just had this very fresh impulse to organize something. And then, I was suddenly offered a space, the most incredible space in New York, also a space which is usually very inaccessible, and or you need to know someone like intimately to access it. And so that was Glossa. Glossa was born like on the Christmas day. And I really, it's, I mean, the word itself goes back to glossa, means, tongue in Greek, but then it's also a word that is part of like many both Italian words and more let's say international word. That's the glossolalia, so there is this it is inherent in the world that there is a tongue moving and doing something, and sometimes also like maybe working with sound in a way that transforms words and their meaning. So it started with this like as an onomatopoeia, because I think onomatopoeias are um we kind of, when you're a kid, the first thing you say are onomatopoeic sounds, like sound that express a feeling. And it can be like something that is hurting you, or something that is marveling you, or making you, like surprise you. So it's, yeah, I was interested in like going back to that very essential experimentation with voice that you are able to do before you assimilate the language and contextualize yourself within it. So, and then the idea was to with glossa was to work on like welcome people in like very intimate context and give the audience very little information about what was going to happen. So this is definitely something that has been returning in my practice, which is the unexpected and creating context in which the audience, the participants, are not fully sure about what's going to happen, because I think that immediately puts oneself in a state like you're less prone to execute those codified behaviors that you would otherwise apply, you know, when you're going to a gallery or a museum. You know exactly what to do. You know how to look at a painting, as you know where the bar is going to be, more or less. You know where the bathroom is going to be. You know, like I feel there is really like a rhythm in like within the architecture of like exhibiting spaces or like concert halls or cinemas. So
even a limitation of not being open to listening or viewing in a way that you could, and you're creating that potential of experiencing something new.
yes, absolutely. Like I mean also like to give agency back to the listener or viewer.
Sure.
I mean, of course, like there are museums who have been experimenting with, you know, with these formats. It's not something new, but like you would usually know what to do. You are like, there are not so many contexts in which you are required, or there is a suggestion for you to interpret the space differently. So but this was like, there was this idea, of course it's not then the way the events happened were very simple. It's like I tried to create a formula that could also eventually be repeated by other people, and actually it has happened interestingly that after people came to glossa, they told me, oh, you know, I got this idea now, I would like to do it, I don't know, in Athens, you know. So I really imagine this formula to be like an open source structure that could then be like repeated by other people in different places. So the at the core of it is, of course, working and inviting artists who are based in the city, so really working with like communities and putting together different kinds of communities, because I feel also that in big cities you tend to go you tend to follow your own community, but then there is maybe another community which is really close, and in some parts is like, you know, there are intersections, but then to find oneself in the same space, in a very small space, is not happening so much, because you tend to choose, you would go where you know that your friends go, you know. So and so it was also like anyone could come to these events. They were not an invitation. I rarely sent like individual invitations unless I really wanted someone to be there. But I also always really trusted the group coming together. So interestingly, each event was very different, and each intervention was a performance, you know, from like more traditional, in a traditional sense, you know, like the voice performances or sound performances or readings. But then there would always be like a chef or like, you know, like a culinary intervention, and each of these interventions would activate the space differently. So you would end up being in this apartment and being in a continuous performance, because then in between performances you would talk, and that was also part, you know, that was like part of the soundscape, you know, like actually that for me was maybe one of the most beautiful parts of it. Like I'm obsessed with people talking and voices overlapping. Like I'm really, I can like stay in a crowd for hours and just listen to that. So for me, everything, it was like a concert from the beginning to the end. So yeah, that's how Glossa started. And in New York, I did 4 at the year in, at the year up. Really well. Also, there was an incredible support from, you know, Rip and the inhabitants of the year, who were all incredible artists and people that really helped in the realization. So actually, also that prompted me to as I brought the series in other places, to always collaborate, so to always start from a conversation with someone else, as again, I could leave some space for surprise also to myself by involving someone else, so I would not have full control. And that's something I really try to have in my practice, to let go of control, or create spaces in which you can do it, or by using my voice, letting go of the control on meaning, or also in my writing, I let go of a lot of control. I mean, when I have to write for like a magazine, of course, I have to be very mindful about the way I write, but I try to always keep a certain degree of elasticity in how I describe things, to welcome some voids that which were these essential vital voids that we had during COVID, that allowed you to imagine, like to have a space to say, oh, there is nothing here, then what could be here? And I think that question is always very inspiring, when you have the possibility to just think about anything.
And believing in the fantasy, believing in the unknown, not doubting it, and getting in your own way of thinking that this doesn't exist, I think is very powerful in your work. And you talk about fantasy, you talk about desires as stimulants for creating work.
Totally.
And how and where your imagination goes, I think, really drives and pushes that potential of something very deep. And I don't want to say your work is simple, but it's using the voice and sound and word, which we all have and we're all able to do, and you've created a very deep, resonant experience.
But eventually it's also, I think simplicity is amazing, like I think that if you have a very simple structure in things, if you have like some pillars, simple pillars, and then you can really like space out. Like whenever I do something, I always try to have these like columns, very strong columns, but then also very condensed, compact, and essential. And then from there, really like take, walk very far away, but always come back. So there is like this element of repetition, which is what also made me, why we met at Meredith's flat, like minimalism. And yeah, I mean, minimalism is simple, but then in the simplicity of the repetition, you can reach like an incredible complexity.
Well, there's space. Space is offered, removing the intellectual idea of experience, and it opens up something profound.
Totally. And embodied also, that has to do with presence. No, I think that repetition allows you to enter deeper in something. Like I'm thinking, whatever you do, of course, that repetition also applies to like more mechanical gestures, which are completely disembodied, but I think that conscious repetition is a very, very powerful. So I also, by doing these glossa in different places and always repeating the format, has allowed me to go deeper and deeper in it. So it's interesting also how the project has, I always like left space for the project to change. So for example, at the beginning, when I was doing it in New York, and also the first times I did in like I did the one in Milano when I came back, and then one in Berlin, and I would do like this post introduction, but very brief, and like just say thank you to the artist and the host. And then I eventually stopped. There was once when we did it in Mondello in Palermo, in this crazy garden under like 40 degrees, with everything was burning around. It was kind of like really apocalyptic, with this collective from Sicily called Landscape 2015. And then there I was working with this curator Leonardo, who's also very, you know, we have some similar approaches to like the unknown, and also not necessarily like taking people by hand and telling them what they need to do or where they need to go. And then we decided that, like, let's not say anything, like let's really leave complete, like a blank page to the participants to understand if some things were really planned or not, if that was an artist or not, you know, like let's not say anything. And then I stopped, you know. So I think that as long as you leave space within a project, that also keeps the project alive. If you allow yourself to, like, because then, if you are aware of the fact that there is going to be like a certain degree of um unknownness, then you have to be really present, you have to be really aware to because otherwise then things are not going to go, are just going to be very random, you know. So you have to be aware of like how this space is mutating, this like void space, and what is entering in it, and just be very perceptive to, you know, it's almost like a constant like sculpturing practice. You're molding the space as the space is molding itself, and it's being molded by the participants and the sounds coming in, or, you know,
Well,
whatever.
I think
Yeah.
you become a participant in it yourself. And I was curious how you're creating the space for artists to express a very vast variety of performance and media, but how as well does it influence your work and how you're constantly evolving through this practice?
Yes, I feel that whatever I do, and you know, I do, like, I am a curator and I'm an artist and I'm a writer, but then I write about others, but then maybe there would be others writing about me. So, like, there there is a very large span in between practices, like conceptually, you know. I feel that nowadays, I mean, everyone is a curator and everyone is an artist, you know. So
Sure.
kind of, but which is great. And also, you know, it does, like, these words completely lost their meaning, or maybe they will acquire a new meaning. But I also feel that when I am, like, a curatorial practice is an artistic practice, like in the same way you're composing a sound piece, or you are painting, or you're creating a sculpture and putting together different materials, choosing the materials, you know, in, like, curating and bringing together people is, it, to me, for me, is a very similar thing. So in the end, of course, everything inspires, each practice inspired the other continuously. So glossa for sure is amazing. I love talking with artists. I love, like, working with artists. I love also giving artists space for them to do whatever they want, which is what I always did within Glossa. Because of course, like, Glossa is like, it's an independent project. It's self-sustained itself by, like, people buying a ticket that includes everything, and usually the prices were really, really low for all the proposals. So of course, to try to keep it democratic and accessible. I never earned anything from Glossa, but I always think that the the value of these relationships, and of, like, seeing people go out of it, like, enriched, and maybe getting very nice feedbacks from people, like that, for me has, like, no price. And also the value of experimenting and creating a space in which others can experiment, because I would always say to the artists, like, look, you can do whatever you want. I mean, of course I would explain the structure. So I would give the artist these columns and say, so these are the columns, but then you can do around it, you can do whatever you want with these columns, and reshuffle them, or, like, you can take them as they are, you know. So, and I, of course, I knew what artists would do, but I would always ask them, like, don't tell me everything, you know. I don't need to know exactly what you're going to say. I'm fine, like, as long as I feel that we have understood each other, you know. So in the end, I would end up being fully part of the audience myself, which is a luxury, because in other projects that I work with, you are always you are mostly the organizer, you know. So I think besides the fact of being inspired by the interventions themselves, I think that I was the most inspiring thing for me was this possibility to continue experimenting and witness other artists experimenting, because that would like just feed like a necessity to continue experimenting in my practice in whatever way, you know, so at large. So I guess
Nourishing your soul and nourishing that power of creative expression.
yes, like in a very free way, you know, in a very free way. Like I think glossa was like a gift always. It was a gift for everyone. You know, it was really like we were like meeting to share gifts, you know.
It felt like a family gathering. I don't know if it was the ear in is a very unique architectural structure, and with the food and the people, it felt very much like being at home. So let's talk about your voice work as a performance artist and how that's evolved. You briefly mentioned that you found this incubator of artists in New York, but has that developed from something through childhood? Were you part of choirs? Is it an evolution of singing or language? How have you formed that role and expression?
So I think that my inclination towards words and in yeah started with writing when I was a kid, and again with like imagination and fantasy, because I grew up in a I had an incredible childhood. I was really lucky to be in a context in which I was giving a lot of like cultural inputs, but at the same time I had a very strict education, so I wouldn't be allowed to, you know, go out so much, or we were not spoiled as kids, me and my siblings. We were not allowed to have to watch a TV or to have Game Boys or, you know, all sort of stuff. So I really learned to live, to create like a fantasy world in that I would live in. And part of that fantasy world, like I had a lot of imaginary friends that I would talk to out loud. And I would immerse myself in these fantasy books that I would love. And I started writing fantasy books since I was really like small, like yeah, 7, 8 years old. Um and this passion for writing and voices then translated in being intuitively drawn to music that had voice. But I think in a first moment it was very unconscious, and it just started. I think it started coming together not so long ago. I would say like 4 or 5 years ago. Yeah, 4 years ago, actually, right before COVID, when I had a moment, I had more time for myself, you know, because otherwise before I would be working a lot and I was doing a lot of different jobs. I always worked in music. I was a writer, you know, like my first job was as a writer. I started writing when I was in high school. I was writing about music. So and then after college, I decided to continue my path in writing. So I fully pursued writing, and I was writing full time for like music magazines and online platforms, and working for a festival where I was writing. So it was all about, you know, it was all about finding the right words to describe something as intangible as sound, you know. So also it was an exercise of translation. And then right before COVID, I bought a mic, and I don't know why I had this feeling like input of like buying a mic, and then suddenly I started recording myself and really enjoying also re-listening to the voice and playing with it and being able to modulate it. So, but I was also very shy about my practice, and I guess I still am, you know, or at least I think that the intimacy that has drawn me into it, and the intimacy of like many of the projects I organize when they are like my own projects, it's something that I'd like to keep in my own practice. So, but yeah, things just like evolved pretty organically. I mean, I always had around me like many like musicians, so I started collaborating with different musicians and contributing with voice. I started like putting in voice my own text. I was writing, I mean, besides writing as a professional writer, I was writing a lot of like creative texts, very fantastic, and already playing a lot with sound. So it's something that came natural to me, or like live improvising, you know, like text and on translating text into sound. So, but actually, yeah, then I had some experiences in which I was again in cities for works, and I was really lonely, which is something that I love. I look for it, you know, like I'm a Scorpio, so tendentially I'm a loner. I love to be alone, because it just gives me a lot of space to think. So when I was in Verona, I was there working for a gallery for some time, and I had an imaginary friend, which is interesting because now it's coming back for. I've been commissioned an exhibition in January, and it's gonna partly focus on this figure, which is an Erma, which is this two figured mythical being that usually was at the entrance of places. And anyways, I had this Erma, which was called the Diorama, who was my imaginary friend in Verona. So I would literally like go out at night and bring this friend out and talk with her out loud and explain her the city. And I started also like putting these stories into and turned them into sound, and they ended up like in radio shows. Anyways, you know, then people start understanding that you do something, and I start getting interested. So I started doing performances. I started like being a vocalist for like friends who were DJing, you know, so just using my voice in many different ways. um, and then when I was in the States, I started recording. I would just like, maybe because I was really inspired by what was around me, I would constantly have sound poetry pieces in my mind. So I was constantly like writing or like recording with my phone, and so I started putting together this almanac of sound poetry pieces. And the amazing thing was that Recital, who was the label who organized this incredible festival, who was like my dream label, you know, like I was obsessed with Recital. I still am. They saw some of these things that I would actually post on Instagram just for fun, you know, and asked me to told me that they wanted to release an album, which is coming out in like next week. So next week I'm doing the release event in Milano, in an amazing place called 7022. And so working with.
What is the title of the album?
Solo voce. So it's only voice. Yeah. So the idea of the album and all the pieces have only voice, and they're different kinds of pieces. They're either pieces that I recorded while walking, so, or like while being in an external space, so you really also hear the surrounding sounds that actually inspired me in that moment. Because, you know, I would maybe listen to someone saying something or hear a sound, and then that word or that sound became something that I always start with repetition. Like I usually start with like saying a word many times until it kind of intuitively leads to other words, and builds this, like, you know, small architecture that then compose the poem. And now that I'm speaking, also there is an experience of like voice that for sure has been always present, which is repeating a word many times until the word is disconnected from its meaning, and you're suddenly like, how can butterfly mean butterfly? We're like,
When you're saying it 10 times,
yes,
butterfly, 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 and it becomes a harmonic relationship.
yes. So that kind, like that experience of like disjointing the sound from the words and having this space. So having a space, again, it's really like, I think in the end it's a lot about space. So yeah, so this is a bit like the process behind Solo Voce. It's also the first time that I released something in solo. I previously had like band projects. I love collaborating. I mean, it's a challenge to it's a it's an amazing challenge to push forward voice as the only instrument. I'm really interested in choirs. I was part of a choir when I was a kid. I always loved singing. Uh, I I mean, people would tell me that they liked my voice, but I was never receptive to it until I started understanding that I could actually experiment with it. So yes, and now my voice practice is then also connected. I mean, I love to work with my voice as much as I love to work with other voices. I think that so I see this album as part of this wider magmatic like corpus of like voice research rather than something disjointed. Um, yeah, it's hard to explain. It's hard to like turn into words, something which is about like taking out of words their meanings. But a lot of these pieces of Solo Voce were born out of like desire for something, for someone. So like they would start from a void that would allow me to fantasize. So I would like create these situations of like extreme tension within myself, either by, for example, like uh deciding to spend 1 week without speaking to anyone and just like roaming around the city and just like letting the city speak to me. And so, or having a flirt with someone very far away and not trying even to see this person, but just like, and sending like emails, text messages, and really feeding this like desire through words. Not even like, it was not necessarily like sexting, just like creating tension through words. And there is actually one poem which is called Tension and Attention, because it came from tension, attention, tension being in attention. And anyway, so like a lot of things would start that way.
I think there's something very interesting about voice and language because we use language as a way to communicate. It's been developed from a very primordial need to connect. But then I think within the sound scape of voice can be a very intuitive message that may not necessarily. So if you're talking about this tension developing between someone, it's not so much the words that are conveying that tension, it's the energy within the voice or the matter between the sound waves that is betraying that tension that exists.
Absolutely. I also I also think that sometimes it's better not to understand the language that you're hearing. I think that for me there is something really like ecological, political to not understanding and making your own sense. I mean, I think that eventually we are required to do this anyways right now, like to make your own sense of things.
Mm-hmm.
Uh, we hear everything and the opposite of everything, and you don't really know what to believe anymore. And there is a lot of censorship right now on specific words that you cannot use, and it has a lot to do with like context, like within which context are those words pronounced or written or
How do you think your upbringing, so you grew up in Italy and you speak the Romantic languages French, Spanish, Italian. It's developed muscle tone and embouchure that, say, for example, for me as an Australian, I didn't have that same creation of sound through the mouth, through the voice, through the vocal cords. And in a way, I think that contributes to the way you present your sound, and not so much the erotic nature, but the desire. There's something ambiguous about how you pronounce and connect with the vocals that is not articulate's not the right word, but it's not direct. How do you feel about geographic languages and different cultural development of language?
Well, it's a very interesting question. I mean, I think that for sure a language and its tone has a lot to do with the cultural landscape, the mentality within which that language was formed. So, there are all these like stereotypes about certain countries that come a lot with the way they talk. About French, if you think about Italians, if you think about, Spanish Americans, and so I think that for sure, like knowing more than one language and is gives you a great flexibility in the sense that you can shift between one personality and the other. I think that, and it's again this relational and conversational aspect of language which makes it so interesting for me. Like if you would speak to nothing, if we hadn't something to speak to, even if it's like an imaginary friend, a stone, or a coconut. And what was the name of that film where this guy is like lost on an island?
Oh, with the Wilson ball, with the tennis ball.
Like you need it.
Was it Tom Hanks?
Exactly. But yeah, like I mix languages a lot. Like now in solo voce there are pieces both in English and Italian. um but I think that that's some poetry is vast, so you can either try to contextualize yourself within one language, or you can play with the stereotypes of that language, or you can completely go out of that language and create a new language. um yes, right now I would have to think about this question more, I think. Yeah.
Is text important to you? So you are writing and there is a message within the words? Or I think if we think about Meredith Monk, for example, she is making sounds that maybe sound like a word, but they're not, and repeating. And so how do you balance that idea of, I think you were talking about before about the meaning disappearing? So how important is the text in holding a message for the listener or the receiver? Or is it just a stimulus for you to create or have some structure to use as a template?
I think that they are almost two different worlds, like the written a written text and its sonic materialization. They play with space in different ways. I love to write. I mean, I think that there are some things that are meant to be read, and some things that are meant to like be expressed through voice, or one thing can be expressed in both ways, but then have two very different meanings, which is amazing. In my text, I would anyways play with sounds. I've always played with sounds. Like I think that I unconsciously always written things that could be then performed. Um, I'm really interested in the way a text occupies more than occupies uh, presents itself within the space of a page. So and again, the space, like, so in the same way John Cage, which was looking at like what was considered as the silence around the piece as the piece, you can look at the space within words in a page as the language. And the same way you can perceive the pauses in between words as, like I like to, whatever I do, I like to like maybe bring the attention also to what is around it, like the context. So, and I think a text has, of course, is very linked to its context. So both the context of the reader. I like to write texts that can be contextualized everywhere. So I tend to write texts that are very fantastical, that are very also figurative, that you could read and imagine, that maybe would, yes, bring images rather than concepts. I think that even if I've also read, more analytical texts, philosophical texts, I always tried to keep a poetic approach to it. Like there was this manifesto that I wrote with a philosopher and writer called Petragogna, which was about fantasy as an ecological practice. And we wrote it as a manifesto. It was very philosophical, but it could also be read as a poem. So even if in the most philosophical text there is always sound always emerges, there is always rhythm. I think every writer has their own rhythm, and that's what makes them special, in the same way like, a musician has their own tonica. Yeah.
Even if it's not spoken, the words are still existing in the mind as they're writing.
Totally.
Do you make visual scores of your work, or is it text, or do you have some sound relationship to how it is spoken?
Yeah, I do visual scores actually for recital. With the album, there is a booklet with 6 visual poems where I play with words within the space of the page, and the words are also juxtaposed uh, with these very fantastical miniature drawings. I play with words on different surfaces. I think I like this idea of like embodying words, of like words as an architecture, like as a physical architecture. If you think of like a letter, if that letter becomes huge, you can eventually inhabit it, which is what is happening anyways. You inhabit the words that you use, like you identify yourself, to speak of yourself within the language, and of course a lot of like struggle related to identity is exactly that there are no words for certain identities, so we're trying to create new words, new spaces for multiple identities to inhabit. So I think that there is a very architectural and physical aspect to language that I try to translate when I use words on a, either if it's on a page, or for example, I paint a lot my clothes with words and letters. This is more part of like the totale practice, which is, I would say, encompassing all my practice. But there is this like practice of like totalizing. So totalizing like a piece, like clothing, in which I would really like drench myself into a particular sound of a word or a poem, and then I would let the sound of this poem and the form of the words lead my movements in then rewriting this poem on like clothing. And then every time I would wear that piece, I would really like, I would be inside this poem. So I would try, like, it's an attempt to inhabit these words, to like make them so also to give them some kind of agency, to allow words to like contain ourselves, and not just us like, being owners of words. I think that language has is like is a very alive organism, you know, and as much as we try to control it, it's always sneaking away. So for example, I'm really interested also now, I have a lot of conversation with ChatGPT because I'm really curious about how, you know, I mean, AI is not another intelligence, it's an artificial intelligence. I hope we can consider it like another, you know, like as something else that we can have a conversation with and that eventually can help emancipate ourselves from ourselves. Um, but yeah, I'm really curious. I think it's fascinating how, you know, like AI, even if it's using words and text that human beings have written, have their own kind of language. I mean, now it's very basic, like ChatGPT is very basic, but still, it's. I could never write that way, you know. So it has again to do with like letting go, allowing, and always acknowledging that there is a space, an other space that you don't master, which is I think what will save ourselves from dystopia, thinking that there is something else that we don't control, you know.
Well, I think even in communication that exists because we communicate from our own experiences, but the receiver is receiving from their experiences, and we can never align where the other person has come from. We can never understand that. So that space needs to be opened for perception and understanding.
Absolutely. What you said is so like we don't really understand each other, you know, like we translate. I mean, you and I mean, you know, we are here because we met in a place where
There was a common ground and there was a common
yes,
interest. And I think that exists amongst all, but we may not understand what the other person is really trying to imbue. And I think that is where sound is so powerful, that it has a deeper, and maybe I think about chanting, mythology, religious practice of sound and liturgy. It hits in a different place. It's not so intellectual, and it gives opportunity for new understanding.
absolutely. No, but sound is yes, is for me is a miracle. Is a miracle not in the sense that it was created as a miracle, but the ability to relate with sound and to learn from sound is something that I could not live without it. You know, I remember at the beginning when I started going more and more into contemporary art in my practice and working with galleries, and you know, I was coming from like a strict music background, even if I was always in contact with art. But I would say my practice had mostly to do with sound. And when I started working in this gallery, I just thought it just like slapped me on my face how different was the experience of sound, and how I mean, which can be very intellectual. Okay, you need some kind of for sure, if you have, you know, some kind of understanding of sound, you listen to, I don't know, Steve Reich or Paulino Oliveros, and you know, uh, it touches you maybe in a deeper way. But I also think that sound doesn't need like a previous study or understanding, and eventually is also made to be experienced by many. It's like it's a collective experience, and is also it's not owned. It can be owned by the listener. You know, it's owned by the community of listeners, and it's also always I mean, it's very impacted by space, the space in which and how it's like amplified, and where are you listening to it, you know, if it's in your headphones or if it's in like in a very like amazing sound system, or if it's like in a bad speaker in a bar, or you know, like you can have thousands of experiences of the same sound. And I think it's similar with words, you know, like you can say the same word to like hundreds of different people, and each one of them will receive it in a different way. And I think also that allowing, accepting that there is a misunderstanding, constant misunderstanding, is very relaxing. You know, we often get angry like, oh, yes, but you didn't understand what I mean that day. And, you know, like people go to psychotherapy because they don't feel
Sure. And have
understood.
many arguments. You have to understand my point of view and acknowledge it, but we have to accept that we will never meet that understanding. We just have to acknowledge the other person's desire or need for expression.
Yes, and tune yourself to, and to going a bit out of your comfort zone of understanding, you know, like saying, okay, like opening yourself to the possibility that it might be that, but maybe it's something different. So making that exercise about thinking about what else could this mean, you know. So which is eventually the exercise of some poetry. You take a word, but then by repeating it, or, you know, by place, or like visual poetry, you know, like you put the word in a certain way in on a surface, and then that word becomes, you don't read the word anymore, or maybe you read it, it's telling you something else, which is very different from what it's written. And I think this is happening constantly, and artists working whose practice is on words give a very precious contribution, you know, to like our relationship with language as like again something very alive that we don't master, you know, that has to do with space and always like a conversation, you know, like you never, even when you speak to yourself, you're speaking to someone else, you know, there is someone else within yourself you're speaking to.
Can you briefly talk about performance and how you approach your own voice work and performing in a live space? Do you have a composition or a plan that you're working with, or it's very intuitive?
No, I like to come with a plan. I also I like to read a lot.
So you'll
I
read
I
a
don't.
text while you're.
I mean, I tried, you know, memorizing, and but then the more I do, the more I realize that I'm not interested in like being a performative body. You know, I don't need to like move, or like I don't need to like be theatrical. Like the focus is on the voice.
Mm-hmm.
So I'm also uh, for example, in November, I'm doing a performance in Milano with a new project. It's a duo project. And the musician I'm collaborating with, Michael Leufen, we have a similar understanding of like, uh, we agree on the fact that we don't need to emerge. We're not interested in being there as like personas, you know. And I think especially when you work with voice has a lot to do with identity. So, and when you listen to a voice, you're immediately curious, you want to hear who is saying that, you know, when you are whatever you are, like, oh, and you immediately turn to look at the person who was saying that. So I'm trying to, and I think also then that leads you, then you connect the voice with the person, how the person is dressed, and multiple things. So I'm trying more and more in my performances to disappear as a performer. So I usually play in like with like very, you know, soft lights. Or now when I'm gonna perform in Milano, I want to try to achieve with lights. I will wear this like red tool gloves, and then I would like just the hands and the mouth to be visible, you know, not in a drum, not like in a super staged way, but I'm not interested in, I don't want people to,
Sure.
yeah, I think also the point of the album Solo Voce is like it's a voice, and it could be whoever's voice, and of course it's my voice, but I'm also not interested in like it's being reconnected with myself, you know. Yeah.
So I think we'll wind up in our conversation. What's in Vittoria Total's future? How do you envision how you will participate in the world?
um well, yeah, I think for sure, like my main interest is creating communities around the things that I do, whether it's like as a curator or a voice artist or a writer. I mean, that's what I'm called for. Community. I feel that right now that's what we need. So for sure in my future I see community. I see like creating spaces for communities to like experiment, be it that like a physical space or like an intangible space. But I also think that I don't want to plan too much. I think that we don't know how things will evolve, and I want to keep a degree of elasticity to be able to constantly not reinvent from scratch, but reinvent the things that I feel are not timely anymore. For sure, like the interest in language and voice is ever present. So I started this year this platform, Unknown Language. Unknown Language will deploy in different ways. I have this dream of like opening a school for like voice experimentation and philosophical speculation. So really having the word at the core and then going deep in the word through philosophy and then completely outside of the word through voice experimentation. So there are many things. I have so many things to learn, and I think the best learning practice is by working with collaborating. So I try to keep that. I really try to collaborate a lot with different people in different ways, to engage in conversations, to try to understand more what someone else is talking about. I think that then allows you to present projects that are mature after a period of like, yes, fermentation, which leads us back to the first thing, one of the first words we used in this conversation. Yeah.
Do you think about etymology of word? Is that important?
Yes.
The root meaning?
I love etymology. I love it. Like I love to kind of dig in the word, because sometimes we use words, and if you look at the etymology, it really tells you more about what you're saying, like how you're using that word. It's always a great surprise. I'm obsessed with etymology. I mostly look up to the etymology of all the words that I use, just to like also unearth the mythology, because etymology has a lot to do with mythology. Of course, it has to do with like also a time that is, like if you think of like Latin based languages to like thousands, the way of thinking of like thousands years ago. So it's an interesting like a temporal connection with previous ways of using language.
You do work with fantasy a lot. Is there a time you feel that your work is placed, or you think it could exist in any space, 1,000 years in the future, 1,000 years behind?
I don't know if it could be placed in any space, but for sure it tries to be open to any space. Yes, I think eventually the success of an artist is to resonate with the times that we're living in. I think that my interest in fantasy is rather reopening time beyond what we're living in now and what we're told we're living in now. So it's like it's almost like giving like an empty bag and say, okay, like you have this, like what do you want to, what shall we bring with ourselves next? Like what do we need to put in this? I mean, a bag is not a very nice metaphor, but something empty.
A vessel.
Yeah.
So final question. What do you celebrate in your life?
I celebrate a lot the relationships of the people that I love, and also being touched by art pieces, like being able to go to a museum or whatever, or a gallery, or or a friend's place and listening and seeing something that makes me cry without me even noticing, like that, like outburst of, I would say, when beauty or something that you consider beautiful touches you to the point that you feel it in all your body. I think that's like what I try to, as when I experience it, is the uttermost gift. Yeah.
I feel your work is incredibly powerful. You're creating these collective spaces that are very important, and that's a great gift that you're giving us. You mentioned you didn't know anyone in New York, but you are able to bring all these incredible people together and inspire and hold space for people, which is a really beautiful gift. It's been a pleasure to speak with you.
Thank you, Emily. Really, likewise, for this inspiring
Yeah, it
conversation.
was wonderful.
Ciao.
Ciao, ciao.
Che giorni? Cosa dire? Che giorni? Se non... Che giorni? Così densi. Che giorni? Che quasi li vivo di traverso. O lì, attraverso. Cosa dire? Che giorni? Cosa dire? Che giorni? Se non... Che giorni? Così densi. Cosa dire? Che giorni? Che quasi li vivo di traverso. O lì, attraverso. Che giorni? Cosa dire? Cosa dire? Che giorni? Che giorni? Se non... Che giorni? Così densi. Che giorni? Che quasi li vivo di traverso. O lì, attraverso. Cosa dire? Che giorni? Cosa dire? Che giorni? Se non... Che giorni? Così densi. Cosa dire? Che giorni? Che quasi li vivo di traverso. O lì, attraverso. Cosa dire? Che giorni? Che giorni? Cosa dire? Che giorni? Se non... Che giorni?
Too hot to be hot. Too hot to behave to be hot. Too hard to be home. Too hot to be held to behave. To be hot or not. Too hot to be hot. Too hard to behave. As you're hot and you're hard to be held. And it's hot and I'm hot. And you're hot. It's too hot to be hot. Too hot or not.
Thank you for listening to We Are Art People. You can listen to full episodes on Apple Podcasts and Spotify. We are online at www.weareartpeople.com. Sign up to our newsletter for show updates and happenings, and please share with someone who may enjoy listening. See you next time.